Hi guys, Melissa here from MKT Photography. Today I've finally put together all the video footage plus some commentary on the winning entry for my scene recreation photo shoot competition. There's also a fantastic video that my good friend Chris put together. It was filmed while we were shooting. We're putting the link to that in the description below, so don't forget to check that out as well. The winning entry was this image right here. The character is 707 from the mobile game Mystic Messenger. And the cosplayer who won the photo shoot was Stacey, also known as Breakfast Cosplay. I will be putting the links to her Facebook page and Instagram in the description below, so you guys can go check out the other work that she has done. Now, we did the shoot in the studio just the other week, and as you can see, there are a lot of photos here of Stacey. They all look pretty similar, they are generally the same pose, but as we go through them, you will see that there are differences. The reason I took so many photos was because I was trying to be accurate to the original screenshot, and I had to photograph each element individually just in such a way that I could Photoshop them all together in post. Now, the first thing I had to do was just pick a few images to start with. I've pulled in a couple of shots here into Photoshop, basically ones that I felt had a bit of a stronger pose. I was mostly looking at Stacey's posture and the position of her arms, and I've just roughly cut them out in Photoshop here just so it's easier to compare them to the original screenshot. Once I've decided which photo I think will work best, then I'm just cleaning up the selection. This is something that usually takes quite a bit of time when you're doing composites, but for this image it actually wasn't too bad. While I was at it, I also picked out a few different expressions of Stacey's. I was really going for something that gave a similar sort of feel as the original screenshot. You know, in that image, it really is quite a cute image of 707. It's quite happy and lighthearted, and he's just got this adoring sort of expression on his face, and that's definitely something I wanted Stacey's expression to convey as well. You will notice in the screenshot that 707 does actually have his mouth open, but if we're going to be honest, a real person just doesn't smile like that, ever. We did try it, however, and I did get one shot of Stacey with this open mouth smile, but as Stacey herself found out when she practiced in the mirror, it just didn't look quite right. She also felt really silly doing it, which is something that will come across on the camera as well, so we decided just to stick with a more realistic closed mouth smile. I did still try to see if the open mouth smile would work in the image, but it really just didn't have the same sort of feel as what we were going for. And this is actually a pretty common problem with any drawn characters. Things that look good when they're drawn, a lot of them don't really translate well to real life, and there's actually several poses that, in particular with anime, a real person actually can't recreate. So there really is only so much we can do to be accurate when we're doing scene recreation photo shoots like this. But I mean, in the end, I think the most important thing in an image is not necessarily being 100% accurate, but rather just being able to get across the same emotion and the same feeling that the original image conveys. Now I'm just doing a bit of cleanup. I'm just really trying to line up this part of the photo that I put in with the rest of the image. This is actually one of the trickiest parts of doing a composite, especially if you are trying to piece together multiple parts of a person from different photos. I mean, people tend to move around between shots, and you know, this pose of Stacey's wasn't actually that easy for her to hold for the 2 hours that we were shooting. It did put a bit of a strain on her back, and I'm pretty sure her arms would have been fairly tight as well, being held out like this. And so with each shot, you know, something was always different, and her hoodie certainly didn't stay in the same place. So that just means you have to do quite a bit more work when you're putting things together. Now we get to what I feel was the most difficult part of doing this composite. Just getting Stacey's hoodie to billow out and float as if she was actually in space was, I would say, actually impossible to do in real life. Mostly it was just because Stacey's hoodie, well, it fit her quite well, and there was just no way that we could get it billowing out and floating just the way the reference image shows. We did try to shoot it in a few different ways, and I did try to see if they would work in Photoshop, but it really wasn't working for me at all. And I found I had the same problem with the shirt as well, because again, you know, it fit Stacey well, and there was just not enough bagginess to it to give that sort of billowing, floating effect. If you look at the screenshot again, you'll notice that the billowing part of 707's hoodie, you actually see more of the front of it rather than the interior of it. And when we were shooting it to try and get the floating look to it, we didn't actually get any photos that were like that. So I just went back to the base image that I started with, where you could just see the hoodie hanging down normally, and I just manipulated it and warped it in Photoshop to give the look that I was going for. I do just want to make particular mention that I would never ever do this kind of thing to a person's body shape. I definitely do not condone changing the way someone looks in Photoshop at all, and I will definitely never do that with any of my photos. The only exception might be if, you know, they were actually not meant to look human, but in general, yeah, that's just not something that I will ever do. I do actually apologize that it appears I have done that in the video here, but of course I never had any intention of using that distorted part of Stacey's legs in the final image. Now, because I was pushing Stacey's hoodie out away from her sides, I did have to bring in another photo of her shirt, and there was quite a bit more blending and cleaning up that I had to do with it. I also had to obviously clone out Stacey's necklace, which is something I should have actually thought about while I was shooting it. It would have just been so much easier to get her to take it off for these shots until we were ready to do the necklace part of the image. In comparison, doing the necklace was actually the simplest part of the entire composite. Shooting it was really straightforward as well. We just attached strings to the back of the cross, and I had my two assistants holding the ends of them on either side. There was a little bit of fiddling around with it, however, because the cross did have a bit more weight to it than we expected, and it basically just flopped around all over the place, so I really had to be quick when I was taking the photos. The cord of the necklace was actually easier, because I could just get one of my assistants to hold the cross itself, and we just moved it around until I got something that I felt was pretty similar to the reference image. When I got it into Photoshop, however, you know, it wasn't the right kind of length and it wasn't quite the right shape, so I did still have to manipulate it in Photoshop, but that is a pretty easy thing to do with an object that is this simple. The two strings hanging down from the hood were also really simple to shoot. Again, we used cotton thread attached to the ends of them, and my assistants just were tugging on them to make the strings fly around a bit. When it came to putting them into the composite, however, this was a little bit trickier, just because Stacey's hoodie, like I mentioned before, was not exactly the same as the way it was drawn in the reference image. You will notice 707 strings are actually quite short, and the front of his hood does actually sit quite a bit lower down on his chest, so I really wasn't going to be able to get it to look like that. I did end up compromising there, but I did try to make sure that the two strings were floating off in the same sort of direction as they are in the reference image. Dripping in the chip packet was another really easy thing to do, and I just did that quickly here. This is actually one Stacey brought in herself, and she told me that it is the same packaging that the game actually draws, and I think that's quite a nice touch actually. After that, I was looking at the headphones. Unfortunately, this was another part that we couldn't photograph to be exactly the same as the screenshot, but here I really just wanted to see if I could find a photo where they were sitting a little bit lower down. I just felt that compared to the original screenshot, they were just hiding a little bit too much of Stacey's neck. I was actually a little unsure whether this would work or if it would just end up looking really weird. But in the end, I did feel it looked better overall. And I also liked how you could see more of the collar of Stacey's shirt, and also just that the hoodie was sitting a little bit more open on her chest. Unfortunately, it did mean that I had to adjust the top of her hood and the neckline and, you know, other parts of the image that I had previously done before. But on the right side, it just wasn't going to line up nicely with the bottom half of the hoodie. So I did end up just reverting back to how it had been before. And unfortunately, it's just the way that doing composites goes. You know, you pick your images and you put them all together and you spend a lot of time lining them up perfectly and making everything look perfect. But then later on you decide to change like one thing, or you find a different photo that you just like better, and you just have to redo half the things that you did before. And this is definitely the reason why doing composites can take so long sometimes. And I admit as well that I can be a bit of a perfectionist. Like, I'm pretty picky about how things line up and blend together. And if something looks even the slightest bit off, like, I just have to fix it. So here I am doing just that again. Just with the left side of the hoodie and the hood. I didn't like how the lining was sitting, so I went back to the base image that I started with and just pulled in like the lining part of the hood. Unfortunately, it wasn't as straightforward just to throw it in, so I did have to do quite a bit more cleanup and cloning just to make sure it did all look like it belonged. There's actually a ton more footage of me doing stuff like that, but I didn't include it in this video just because it really did take a long time, and you know, there was a lot of back and forth with it, so I just wanted to keep things concise. Now the floating chips was the last thing we had to photograph, and this was pretty straightforward as well. My two assistants just held the chips in different positions around Stacey, both in front and behind, and at a couple of different angles. And then putting them into the final image was also quite simple to do. I did try to place them in exactly the same places as they are in the reference image, but because Stacey's pose was just slightly different to 707's, I did have to make a few adjustments to where they were placed. Putting them in did take quite a bit of time, so I am going to just speed through the footage a little bit here. Now at last, we finally come to doing the background, and this is definitely the most creative part of the composite. Everything else was kind of more on the technical side, but the background I had to actually put together a little bit more creatively. Now the photo that I used was a stock photo that I got online, and usually whenever I use stock photos, it's never a matter of just dropping the photo in and being finished with the image. There's usually a lot more work that needs to be done, mostly with colors and contrast and things like that. And that's something you have to be really careful with, because otherwise it can be really obvious to people that you've just created a composite. I mean, obviously with this image, you know, there's no way it could be anything but a composite, but there are still things that can be done, even to an image like this, that will make it look more realistic and believable. What I'm doing now is just add a bit of a glow around the edges of Stacey here, just because there is light coming from the background towards her from the planet. I just wanted to enhance the effect a little bit. Now I've pulled in a cloud photo just to produce more of the atmosphere in the background. Then I pulled in a second cloud photo because when I was looking at the screenshot, I did notice the planet behind 707 was more cloud covered than my stock photo. And then I moved on to doing a bit of work on Stacey's hair. I was mostly just adjusting highlights and shadows here just to give her hair a little bit more definition and shape. These changes are actually quite subtle. When I get to this point with any image, the majority of changes I make do tend to be subtle, and they don't actually come across very well in a video. So I have actually cut out a lot of the footage from this part of the video as well. Now what I'm doing is creating the shadow for the necklace. I mean, in the original photos, the necklace didn't really cast a shadow, but in the reference image, there was a shadow there, so just to be a bit more accurate, I decided to put it in. Now, the creases and the folds in Stacey's shirt are something I would normally pay attention to during shooting so that I wouldn't have to clean them out in Photoshop afterwards. But at the time, you know, I was expecting that we would work with Stacey's shirt a little bit more to try and get that billowing floating effect that it has in the screenshot. It was just unfortunate that we really couldn't do anything with it at all. So I basically just decided to clean it up a little bit and leave it at that. I did the same thing with her jeans, and then the next major thing that I had to do was just add in the text and the hearts that are drawn on the screen. It wasn't hard to pick a font. 707, you know, he's meant to be some IT hacker person. So usually when people think of computers, the font they think of is Courier New. So that is what I used here. And then I just traced over the hearts and the little smiley face and added a glow to it. There was quite a bit of editing that I did after this. They were mostly subtle changes that I actually didn't record. Mostly it was due to performance issues. Photoshop was really lagging for me at this point. It had been for quite a while. Just because this image, you know, was made up of so many different photos and it had so many different layers, and my computer just couldn't handle it very well. So it was a good thing that I was actually quite close to finishing this image by then, and you know, I feel like this video has been long enough as it is. So if you guys managed to stick around and watch this entire video, then I just hope that you found it interesting, and I would love to hear any thoughts that you have or any suggestions that could make a video like this better. It took me a really long time to put everything together for this video, so I don't know when or if I will do another one like this, but if you did find it valuable, please let me know in the comments, and if that's the case, you know, maybe I will try to do more like this in the future.